I've been trying to figure out why this Bentley runs out of gas in seconds. Take a look at this. Someone drilled 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a 5th hole all the way back there. 5 holes in the gas tank of this Bentley. I only drove this car 3,000 miles and I lost over $11,000 on it. There it is, there's the leak. This is going to be a nightmare. Hey guys, I'm Samcrac, and over the last several years, I've racked up dozens of auction projects. I ran out of garage space long ago, so I started parking them out here in this cow pasture, which is now the car pasture. But earlier in the year, I decided we need to thin the herd, and I started sending a lot of these back to the auction. Strangely enough, the ones that I thought were the worst of the worst made me some money. The ones that I thought were safe bets lost me thousands. So today, I'm going to show you the real numbers, what I paid for these cars, what they ended up selling for, and how it proves just how unpredictable of a business auction flipping can be. And I'm going to show you some of the things that happen in between, like cars breaking even worse after fixing them, and also finding things like holes in the bottom of my Bentley's gas tank. But I want to start things off with a car I never actually featured here on the channel, and that's this 2012 McLaren MP4-12C. Now, during the peak of pandemic hysteria, I had to have one of these McLarens. I wanted a nice one that I could actually use, and I paid up. It's the most amount of money I've ever spent on a car to date, and that always bothered me. So after driving it for the first few months, I kind of parked it away, and I still own it. But I always wanted to enjoy it more than I could, so I regularly search for these McLarens, and up popped this black one with a clean title and 40,000 miles for $65,000. That was the asking price. Now, the auction didn't provide a lot of information. Of course, it was sold as is, and that can be a huge gamble with these cars. The early ones were known to have transmission and engine failures. There's all sorts of little things that can go wrong that create huge problems. And well, I took the bait. Now, before we came to an agreement, I searched this car online, and it had quite the history. Early on in its life, it was involved in what looked like a pretty minor accident. And that person, instead of getting the car fixed, went and sold it on Bring a Trailer. And it went for good money because, again, this is when these cars were a lot newer. Again, if you look at these Bring a Trailer photos, the car looks like it was barely damaged. It's something that could be taken care of pretty easily. But these cars have carbon tubs. You don't know what's wrong in this corner that it was hit without getting up close photos, which there are none of. Anyway, after selling at Bring a Trailer, this car surfaced at a few other online auctions, and every time this car was relisted online, it seems like the photos kept getting further and further away. The car looked great from a distance, but up close, it was super rough. The auction photos that I got was the same ordeal. You could tell there was something strange going on. The headlights were yellowed, the bumper looked extra glossy, and so I prepared for the worst, but at a price of $65,000 with a clean title for a McLaren, how do you go wrong? I talked to the seller a little bit, and I offered him $60,000 for the car. He came down to $61,000, and I felt like I stole that car. And when it showed up, well, it was kind of what it was. It did run, it did drive. It didn't seem to have any severe issues in the drivetrain. There were no leaks that I could find, but I did find that it was missing a few panels, like the engine surrounds, which obviously cost thousands of dollars if you had to replace them. The front lower cover that protects all the stuff in the front was halfway gone. The stereo didn't work, but why I didn't start actively driving it is because the first time I rode it down the street, I heard this squeaking coming from the back corner. It turned out that all it was a bushing in the rear shock. And of course, McLaren doesn't sell you just the bushing. They want to sell you an entire shock assembly, again for a few $1,000s. And it was a quick reminder that you get what you pay for. So I quickly lost interest in it and decided maybe I should just move it back at the auction. Now, I held onto this car for several months, and I put it at the auction, and surprisingly enough, it brought $65,000. By the time I paid fees and things like that, I made about $3,500, and I didn't sink really a single dollar into that car. Cheap McLarens are a real risk, especially up front, because they're several tens of thousands of dollars. This one worked out, and of course, while the risk probably wasn't worth the $3,500 profit, at least there was profit, and I could say I had 2 McLarens at one time. Which is pretty unimpressive when neither one of them works. And well, this one will work if I just go and get some juice in the battery. Every few months, I forget to plug in the battery tender. That lithium battery dies, and to get in this car is a pain. You got to remove a trim piece. You got to use a pliers to turn the door key because, well, that's how McLaren designed it. You got to pull an emergency latch in the door, get in the trunk, and then you got to jump start the battery because, well, when it's as dead as it is now, it doesn't work. So when I need to actually get somewhere, I take my 1.5 horsepower log splitter. Now, like our McLaren being dirt cheap and making us a little bit of money, I anticipate that this Z06 could do us the same. This has to be one of the cheapest C6 Z06 Corvettes ever to sell. It did come with a rebuilt title, but I paid just $16,000 for it. That's with all auction fees. That's with shipping. And well, it's a complete car. When I got it, I thought that it would run well as it only has 18,000 miles on the clock. But as you guys have pointed out in the comments section, the thing looks like it has 180,000 miles on it. I just wanted to give you a quick update on this car, as it's been a few weeks since we made a video, and we have been actively working on it. I just want to wait until it's actually running and driving before we release that video. But we went ahead and upgraded all 4 shocks because a few of them seemed worn out with these Bilstein B8 dampers. They're highly regarded on the Corvette forums as being the best shocks for this platform. And we've got the whole entire front torn apart here. The steering rack moved over to the side, and the timing cover is off in there, as we're planning on upgrading its timing components with a billet steel set. Now, while we could probably get away with running the stock timing stuff on this Corvette for a little bit over $100 to upgrade everything to billet steel, seems like good inexpensive insurance. It's probably the only inexpensive insurance you'll find on a 600 horsepower Corvette. It's actually really funny because I just switched insurance providers. I felt like I was paying more and more every year, and I wasn't getting any more with my current insurance, but I had heard that SoFi partnered with Experian to provide this really efficient way to shop for car insurance, and it's what landed me a policy that was several $100s cheaper, but actually came with more coverage than I was getting. And it's really simple. All you have to do is visit SoFi.com/Samcrac or hit the link in the description. They're going to ask you a couple of things like what sort of car you drive, and what sort of coverages you're looking for, and they provide competitive quotes from different providers that could help you save $828 a year. That's on average. In my opinion, there's no reason to stick with your current provider if there's a better rate out there from someone else. That's why you should hit the QR code or hit the link in the description and visit SoFi.com/Samcrac and get all your quotes in one place with SoFi. It only takes a few minutes, and you can find out whether you're getting the best deal on car insurance. 57% of people are overpaying for their car insurance right now. Don't be one of them. Visit SoFi.com/Samcrac and start saving today. Pretty much every car I shop at the auction, I do so because I was interested in these cars, especially from my teenage years. Cars like the E55 AMG or the Gen 2 Dodge Viper. When they show up cheap and I'm able to enjoy them for a month or a year or 10 years, it just is like a dream come true. I rarely ever go into the auction saying, you know what I want to do today? I want to buy a car to flip. But when I saw this Genesis, that's exactly what I thought, because the selling dealer couldn't sell it, sat for weeks, and they wanted $12,000 for this. This is a G90. This would be your top of the line sedan from Genesis. And it's really a nice car. I didn't know a lot about it when I bought it. All I know is that it was marked with an engine issue, and they wanted like 50% less than the next cheapest wholesale Genesis with similar miles. So I went and did a little bit of research on these cars and found out that they seem to be decently reliable. I went and rolled the dice on it. Again, it was hard to pass up at the price. And when I got it, I drove it for a few days before the low oil pressure warning showed up on the dash. Well, oil pressure is obviously extremely important. I think that if the car truly had low oil pressure, I would have figured that out in the first few seconds of driving it. And at this point, I had been driving it several days. Of course, it was just a broken oil pressure sender switch, a common failure that a lot of cars have, and especially these Hyundais and Genesis models. They're known for these switches failing. It's a bit of an extensive job. A lot of the top part of the engine has to come apart to get to it. Once you replace it with a new part, which is like 60 or 70 bucks, that light goes away and the car continues to drive just like it did. So when my brother's 5 Series Hybrid started having air conditioning issues, I told him that I'd help him fix it. And I started looking into what the fix entailed and how much the parts cost. And on the BMWs, but really any hybrid drive car, their air compressors are different than your standard cars, and they cost a lot more. At the dealership, I think a replacement part was around $2,000. Online, used ones were nearly $1,000. And everyone seems to have these issues very prematurely, out of warranty. This job was something like $5,000 or $6,000. And the dealership in some cases will even say that all the lines have to be replaced, because if you got metal in the lines, they don't want to take the risk. And that's what mechanically totaled a lot of the early BMW electric cars, the i3s. Anyway, I gave him the keys to this Genesis and told him to drive it for a few days. He loved it. He liked it more than his BMW. I ended up doing an even swap. I took his broken BMW, sent it to auction, where I got $13,000 for it. So I maybe made a couple $100. We'll call it an even trade, but I'm thrilled to have kept this one in the family. And I love when he drives me around in the back seat of it, because it really is that nice of a car. And if I ever get to the point where I want to start driving boring cars, but ones that are reliable, on the top of that list will be a Genesis G90. Now, while I might consider the G90 boring, I've learned that there's a lot of upside to owning something cost-effective and boring versus something much more flashy and needy like my Audi RS7. This is one I thought I couldn't lose on. As a matter of fact, when I released a video showing you how good a condition this car was in spite of its high miles, I got a ton of inquiries to buy it. But unfortunately, these inquiries don't always convert to real money. Now, this Audi wasn't as is. It was a facelifted RS7, and it was pretty well equipped. When I got it, it ran and drove great, and I even took it straight to the dealer where they performed a recall and a major service on it. It didn't cost me any money. And while the car worked perfect in the time that I had it, it did have a bit of an oil leak coming from the front. Unfortunately, on these cars, they crammed their engines and cooling systems so close together. In order to do any sort of service on it, in some cases, you got to either drop the engine or dismantle the whole front end of the car, which is almost a day's labor by itself. At one point, I just figured I'd try and get exactly what I had into it back. I wanted right around $30,000 for it, and heck, I would have taken $1,000 or $2,000 off. Months went by after I featured this car on my channel, and I got even more emails asking if people could buy the Audi RS7. But again, the second the oil leak was brought up, it went nowhere. So I sent this car to the auction, and I figured it would do decent. The auction values on them were anywhere between $27,000 and $29,000. It ran a few times, and I finally let it go for $25,000. Since then, I've seen them dip into the low 20s. And if I'm being honest, these prices are pretty fair, even though I wanted more and I assumed it would get more because it had that RS badge on it. You know, a lot of the Audis that have that RS, it's like having a BMW that is a true M car. They just tend to hold their value better, even though Audi sells a very similar car that sells for like half its price, and that's the S7. The big difference between the S7 and the RS7 is its transmission and the turbochargers. And a lot of people have fitted RS7 turbos onto S7s. They have the same 4-liter engine otherwise. The big difference is that the dual clutch transmission, which comes on the S7, and actually sounds fancier than the automatic that comes on the RS7, it can't handle the power that the RS7 is capable of outputting. And so that's the big limiting factor of those cars. I've seen S7s in the neighborhood of $12,000 and $13,000. That's how cheap they sell for them, just because, well, they're old Audis and they're going to be needy once they hit that 120,000 mile mark. Anytime you cram this much power and technology into a small engine compartment, well, you tend to just have problems, kind of like my turbo Porsche Cayman, which had an aftermarket kit slapped into a very compact Porsche engine bay. And while this one never stopped giving me issues. In spite of that, the price on this car was right. I think with all the auction fees and shipping, I paid $11,000 for it. It's got a 5-speed manual transmission, and it was a bit rough cosmetically, but you couldn't find a manual Porsche Cayman in decent running condition with a clean title with these sort of miles anywhere near that price, let alone with a $12,000 aftermarket turbo kit on it. Now, when I got the car, it was smoking badly out the tailpipes, and we went and rebuilt the turbo. The turbo rebuild kit is like $20, and so
it's like I spent nothing to fix its core problem. The car did run and drive fine after that, but the comment section let me know that what was happening is that oil was pulling up in that turbo. It wasn't moving fast enough through the line. Because the turbo sat in such a low spot in the engine compartment, gravity was causing all that oil to pool up. So I went and created a turbo scavenge kit with a bunch of parts off of Amazon, spent a few $100s doing so, hooked it all up, and besides adding kind of a noisy buzz as the car would run, the car seemed to remain pretty much the same, but it would always tend to hiccup and jump like it was misfiring, and the engine would constantly cut power randomly. Now, I spent a lot of time diagnosing this car. We took the spark plugs out, we scoped the cylinders, and believe it or not, the engine looked to be in very healthy condition. I really wanted to love this one for the price because, again, I spent $11,000 on the car, and I really only had a few hundred into it. And I thought this was going to be a long-term keeper for sure, so I threw a Bilstein coil-over suspension kit on it. Anyway, time went on, and I ended up losing interest like usual. But a comment popped up on this video, which was several months later at this point, that said that it's really not necessary to put a scavenge pump in this car. What you really want to do is bore out the fitting that comes with this turbocharger, make it larger so that the oil can flow freer. And man, it's just amazing how sometimes you get the right info a little bit too late. Anyway, I sent this one to the auction and it got 15 grand, which was a good price when you consider I paid 11, but the killer was the expensive suspension that I put on it. If I wouldn't have put that on it, we would have cleared like a $3,500 profit. Instead, that profit is more like $250. Now, this is one I had the opportunity to make a quick $6,000 or $7,000 on without even thinking about it. But that's the problem. I thought about it. This car was graded way worse than it actually was. At these auctions, there's a scale from 0 to 5, 5 being pristine, 0 being its total junk, and it was graded like a 1.7 when I got it. Besides the suspension looking funny, I couldn't tell why the auction graded it so low. As a matter of fact, one of the worst problems that ended up having after we were done fixing it was the fact that it came with a cracked windshield, and the auction totally missed that part. They didn't even list it, and they ended up compensating me a few $1,000s for it, even though if you needed to replace it, out-of-pocket costs are like $5,000 or $6,000 for a Bentley windshield. Now, fortunately, the crack was on the passenger side, and I just decided to ignore it during my time owning the car. But that is obviously a major detractor from getting someone to buy it. And when I first listed the car, I got an offer for $68,000. I countered that person a little bit higher. They ignored the offer. And the way it works for the auction is the second someone accepts it, they own the car. There's no going back. So this was a legitimate cash offer. It went away, and for the next month or two, I continued to get offers in the high 50s and low 60s, basically offering me back what I had paid for the car. And eventually, I sold it to someone for $63,000. We ended up putting maybe a few $100s worth of parts into it while I had it. Every fix the car needed would have cost upwards of $10,000 at the dealer. Luckily, we found alternate solutions that really made it a much better car to own. It's one of the reasons why I still go back and I look at them to this day, because these Bentley Bentaygas are a tremendous amount of car for the money. Speaking of Bentleys, how can we forget about the Continental GT convertible that I picked up from a South Florida flood with a really, really low water line. It's unbelievable how much these cars have dropped in value. Most all of them that sell used now go for parts, and people don't even want to repair them because they're really unreliable, and the technology that was put in these cars is so dated. And while they're good drivers while they're working, that's all you got. So it's not a great car to own, and it's still hard to consider them a good deal, even though this one only cost me, I think, $9,000, maybe a little bit more than that, with auction fees. And honestly, the drivetrain in this car was darn near mint. I couldn't find a single leak in the engine or transmission. Once we got it running by fixing a waterlogged module, it would actually stay running and drive, but only for a few seconds. It ran out of gas, and I thought that maybe there was an issue where the car was running super rich and it was just dumping all the fuel that I would put into it, into this 12-cylinder engine. But every time I would fill it up, I would smell gas. And then one day I got underneath the car and noticed something.
Someone drilled 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a 5th hole all the way back there. 5 holes in the gas tank of this Bentley.
You know what it would cost to fix this? And you wouldn't even want to deal with the job. It's an all-wheel drive car, so there's a lot of stuff crammed in the undercarriage here. But I called up a parts breaker friend of mine. They buy a lot of cars from the salvage auction, like where this Bentley came from. And they told me it's not the first time they've seen this. As a matter of fact, they're seeing it more and more. And they tend to believe that people are drilling these holes to steal the gas out of all these salvage auction cars, somewhere in between the car getting totaled out and showing up at the salvage auction. While they're on these delivery trucks, they're obviously elevated in the air. There's a lot of clearance to get to those tanks. And so again, gas thieves are just going and drilling holes. Apparently 5 of them is what you need to do to get all the fuel out of a V12 Bentley. Now, when we were making the videos on this car, I told you that it was somewhere in between being able to be fixed on a moderate budget, but it would probably be better just to go and flip back at the auction and get what we have into it, plus a few $1,000s since we made it a running car. And unfortunately, it's still at the auction and it hasn't sold yet. The offers the offers that I've gotten so far have been like $1,500 less than I paid for it in non-running condition. And of course, I spent like, I don't know, $300 to $500 on that immobilizer module to get the car running again. So this one is sure to be a loss. I anticipate I'll lose about $1,000 on it. Which is just unbelievable. Nobody wants a cheap used Bentley at the salvage auction, especially one that it's already been toyed with by me. And now for the best worst car I've ever bought at the auction. It wasn't this Range Rover, which I only paid $700 for. It was my Range Rover long wheelbase autobiography supercharged. This car was the bee's knees when it came out. It would have cost like $150,000 new. I paid just $24,000 for it used with 115,000 miles on it. And as a matter of fact, when this thing showed up online, it was so hot I got into a contest with another guy who was interested in buying it. He complained so much to the auction that they didn't let him have it because I hit the button first, that he got a $500 credit from the auction. I ended up with this Range Rover. In hindsight, he ended up with a much better deal because this thing cost me thousands and I lost the most I've ever lost on any car. Now, when this Rover showed up, cosmetically, it was pretty mediocre, but it ran great, and that's what I wanted because this is the ultimate Range Rover. This thing was fast, and it was huge, and it was comfortable, and it had TVs in the back, and they reclined. I mean, it was amazing for 3 days before it started smoking out of the tailpipes, and it smelled absolutely foul like rotten eggs. That's because one of the injectors had failed, and well, that's $1,000 DIY fix because I replaced all 8 of them. You could get away with doing one, but the chances of another one failing right behind it is pretty high. With that out of the way, I absolutely adored this car. I drove it as much as I could, and I ended up giving it to my wife to drive it around. She loved it, and she drove it for only around a year, very sparingly, put around 3,000 miles on it, when she told me that a light came on the dashboard, something about the stability system. When I heard that, I didn't think that it was any big deal. I knew the car had an air suspension, and a lot of people freak out about air suspensions because they're very expensive to repair at the dealership. But when you DIY repair air suspensions, usually they're not as expensive as you might think. So I told her to keep driving it, and that was a huge mistake on my part. When I looked at the car, I noticed that all 4 corners of it were sitting at an appropriate height. That light was on the dashboard, and so I had to wonder, like, what is the suspension-related issue that this car had? Now, on these super high-end Range Rovers, they came with a hydraulic anti-roll bar system, almost like what they're putting in these McLarens, and it's what gives these cars an unbelievable ride, even though they're huge, heavy cars. If I would have just bought a cheaper one, a couple trim levels down, I wouldn't have had this problem because the car wouldn't have come equipped with the system. Anyway, when I got underneath the car, I noticed that there was a splash of oily fluid all over the bottom, but it was too thin to be motor oil. And I took off one of the lower splash shields, the one that hides all the metal lines for this hydraulic system. Over the time that this car had been on the road, it had accumulated so much debris and rocks and dirt in this panel that it was just rubbing against these metal lines, and it popped a hole in one of them. I immediately went to look for a replacement assembly of lines. You have to buy them all, and then they connect to the hydraulic pump on the front of the engine. And first off, you can't buy them. They're on permanent back order from Land Rover. Second of all, there's guys with used ones online, and they look as rusted and corroded as the ones that I've got here. And third, I couldn't figure out any reasonable way to detach these from the front of the engine without literally hanging the engine or just dropping it out of the car. They were so packed in there tightly. Now, I'm sure you could get these lines repaired, but a hydraulic shop, I'm sure, would want them off the car. So I tried to think of any feasible way to repair this line. Of course, it was punctured right on the bend, so it's not like you could buy some sort of compression fitting that would go right in the middle. It was like the impossible repair. Without dismantling this entire car, you were never going to fix this, at least not right. And so I filled it with hydraulic fluid. I tried to slip a piece of high pressure hose over it. And while my fix seemed to hold, I think the car was driven with low fluid to the point enough where the pump had failed. So at the very least, the car needed a new hydraulic valve block, which wasn't all that hard to get to. But in a worst case scenario, if the pump had failed, which I don't think it failed because it never got completely dry, but if the anti-roll bars failed, you were talking about a DIY job that would cost in excess of $8,000 or $9,000 to replace everything with fresh parts, if you could get them. Anyway, I ran this thing at auction, listed it completely as is, and these are the worst cars to run as is because people are well aware of the engine failures they can have because their timing chain issues. This hydraulic suspension issue would cost almost equally as much to fix, and so people are very leery of them. Now, realistically, I want to believe this car should sell for $18,000 or $19,000, even with the body being in mediocre condition for a long wheelbase autobiography, if everything was working on it. But since everything wasn't working on it, it took a long time and a lot of price drops to get any sort of interest. Finally, I got offers for $11,000. I went back and forth. I think he ended up paying me $13,000 for it. That $11,000 loss was just on the car itself. I put a few grand into the car just reconditioning it before I started driving it. So to lose $13,000 on a car that was 10 years old when I first got it, that had over 100,000 miles on it, and that I paid wholesale value on, was just a hard pill to swallow. That is the worst I've ever had at the auction that I can recall on something that was moderately straightforward. You know, sometimes you gamble with these salvage cars and the damage can be a lot worse than you anticipated. And while I think that's bad, how about the guy that bought it for $150,000 new and probably lost 3 times that in the first year of depreciation? So I guess it's all relative, and it's all part of the auction business. You can see that a lot of these aren't big wins. A lot of the times they can be big losses, but also I tend to use the cars. I'm not getting in and out very quick. The story completely changes if you're more methodical than I am. One of the things that surprised me consistently is that the more expensive, more flashy cars bought right hardly ever lose money. It's kind of these mid-range cars that you spend $20,000 or $30,000 on that you can get absolutely hosed just because you thought the market was different than it actually was. And I hope this gives you a better insight as to how these auction flips works. If it does, be sure to hit that like button. Also, if there's something in particular you want to see me gamble on over at the auctions, let me know down in the comments. I'm always looking for fresh new ideas, and I read every single one of your comments. I can't thank you enough for them and for watching today, and I'll catch you very soon.